The morning of the hearing, I woke before the alarm, eyes already fixed on the ceiling. On the pale plaster above my bed, the water stain still looked like a bird in flight, wings stretched wide, head turned toward the window like it knew where the sky was. For a while, I just lay there, tracing its outline in my mind, pretending if I didn't move, the day couldn't find me. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the fridge humming and a car door slam 3 floors below. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, a calendar reminder I didn't need. I turned it face down, slid my feet to the cold floor, and stood in that thin gray light October likes to pull over everything. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and reached for the chipped "World's Best Mom" mug Emma had found at a thrift store years ago. The letters were faded now, cracked at the edges like they'd been scrubbed too hard. I spooned in coffee, watched the dark grains settle at the bottom, then opened the closet door and faced the gray suit hanging there like someone else's life. My sister had called it courtroom armor, pressing the hanger into my hands at her kitchen table. "Judges notice this stuff," she'd said. "You want to look solid." Now, under the yellow closet bulb, it looked stiff, unforgiving. I ran my fingers down the sleeve, then caught my reflection in the long mirror on the door. I looked like a woman who'd slept with her jaw clenched. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water and watched it turn the coffee into something drinkable. The smell rose soft and familiar, but my stomach tightened. I wrapped both hands around the mug anyway, just for the heat, then set it down untouched on the counter. By the time I went to wake Emma, the sky outside had shifted from blue to that pale, undecided white that never quite becomes daylight. She was curled on her side, hair across her face, the way she used to sleep when she was small and would migrate to my bed halfway through the night. For a second, I saw her at 3 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit, whispering that the thunder was too loud. "Hey, Em," I said softly, touching her shoulder, "it's time." She opened her eyes without a sigh, without rolling away. That was my first warning, though I didn't name it then. She sat up slow, like she'd already been awake in her thoughts. The navy dress we'd laid out was folded on the chair. She picked it up and held it against her chest for a moment before standing. I backed out of the room to give her space and waited by the door, listening to the small sounds of fabric hangers, the zip of her backpack. When she stepped into the hallway, she looked like a photograph: neat hair, white collar, socks pulled up straight. The backpack straps were tight across her shoulders, the bag itself heavier than it should have been. "You sure you want to bring all that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "No school today, remember." "It's my stuff," she said. "I want it with me." I nodded, pretending that was enough. The hallway smelled faintly like someone else's dinner from last night and the detergent from the laundry room downstairs. The elevator groaned its way up to our floor, doors shuddering when they opened. Inside, Emma watched the numbers above the door instead of our reflections in the metal. I watched both, two figures standing straight like you do when you're trying to prove you're fine. Outside, the air met us cold and clean. Our breaths came out in small white puffs as we walked to the car. The sky sat low and flat, the kind of sky that couldn't decide between rain and doing nothing at all. Emma slid into the front seat and pulled the seatbelt across her chest with quick, practiced hands. Her backpack stayed on her lap, zipped all the way, her fingers resting on the top like it was something alive. The drive to the courthouse wasn't long, but it stretched out anyway. I left the radio off. The only sounds were the engine, the turn signals, and the dull rush of other people going somewhere normal. Trees lined part of the route, their leaves halfway surrendered. Gold and rust-colored pieces clung to branches or lay scattered on the sidewalks, caught in small drifts near the curbs. "Remember when you used to stomp through the leaves?" I said, eyes on the road. "You said it was like walking through cornflakes." Her mouth twitched just a little. She didn't look away from the window. "Yeah," she said. "You doing okay?" I tried. "You know you don't have to say anything in there unless you want to. It's mostly just the grown-ups talking." She shifted, adjusting the backpack on her knees. "I know," she answered. Her voice was steady, but it landed somewhere low in my chest. The courthouse rose ahead of us in glass and stone, all straight lines and uniform windows. It looked like a place that believed in answers. I parked farther from the entrance than I needed to, just to have a few extra steps. For a moment, we sat in the car with the engine off, the silence pressing in. I could hear my own heartbeat, quick and light. "Hey," I said quietly, turning toward her. "Whatever happens, okay? It doesn't change how much I love you, none of this does." She nodded once, eyes still forward. "I know, Mom." We stepped out together. The wind caught my hair and tugged at the hem of my blazer. Emma walked half a step ahead, shoulders squared in a way that didn't quite match her age. On the wide stone steps, people moved around us, suits, uniforms, hoodies, high heels. Snatches of conversations floated by, fragments of other troubles, other days. Halfway up, she slowed. "Mom," she said so softly I almost missed it in the wind. I stopped beside her, yeah. She stared at the tall glass doors above us for a long second before turning her head. Her eyes looked older than they had in the elevator. "Mom, I need to show them something." The words dropped between us, small but loud. My first thought was paper. A folded note. Some earnest, crooked handwriting about who she wanted to live with. "That's okay," I said carefully. "Did you write something for the judge?" She shook her head, "Not like that." Her hand moved to the front pocket of her backpack. The zipper sounded too loud as she pulled it open. From inside, she took out a small, worn notebook, the one with the bent corner I'd seen on her nightstand for months, next to a glass of water and a reading lamp. "Emma," I asked, my voice thinning, "what is that?" She held it close for a second, fingers pressing into the cover. Then she opened it somewhere near the middle. Lines of ink stared back at us, her round handwriting filling the pages, dates in the top right corners. "It's everything," she said. "What it's like with you and with Dad, when you fight, when you don't, when I'm scared, when I'm not." She didn't look away as she spoke. That steadiness hurt more than if she'd cried. I glanced at the open pages. A little drawing of a house split into two halves. A small figure drawn in the gap, arms stretched toward both sides. On another page, underlined 3 times. "I don't want to choose, but they're making me." There were notes about missed pickups, about dinners eaten alone at his place, about how my apartment always smelled like coffee in the morning and laundry soap at night. Short sentences. Facts, really. But each one tugged at something inside my ribs. "You wrote all this," I whispered. She nodded. I didn't know who to tell, so I told the notebook. Her thumb brushed the edge of the page. "Today, I want to show them so they know it's not just about stuff." She glanced toward the parking lot where nicer cars sat in neat rows. Or houses. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The wind tugged at my suit jacket, cool against my damp palms. "What if they don't listen?" I heard myself say. The fear slipped out before I could cover it. Emma's eyes came back to mine. There was something clear there now, like a light had turned on behind them. "Then at least I said it," she replied. "At least somebody heard it, even if it's just you and the notebook and whoever writes things down in there." A thin smile moved across her face, gone as quickly as it came. A dry leaf skidded across the step beside us, scraping softly before settling against Emma's shoe. She looked down, stepped around it with surprising care, as if she refused to crush something already fragile. "Will you come with me when I tell them?" she asked. Her voice sounded small again just for that sentence. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my sides, then reached out and rested one on her shoulder. "Always," I said. For a breath, we stood there together, not moving. In my mind, the water-stained bird hovered on our ceiling at home, caught forever between staying and flying away. Emma closed the notebook, slid it back into her bag, and pulled the zipper shut. Then she turned to face the glass doors, shoulders lifting, then settling. Ahead of us, the doors swung open for a group of strangers. Warm, artificial light spilled onto the gray steps, cutting a bright strip through the cold. Emma stepped toward that line of light first. I followed one step behind, feeling something inside me finally, quietly let go. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of scent that settles into the walls after years of whispered confessions and quiet heartbreaks. When the heavy doors closed behind us, the sound echoed through the room like a soft warning. I felt Emma's sleeve brush against my hand as we walked down the aisle together, her steps small but steady. For a moment, I watched the sunlight filter through the tall windows, dust drifting in the beams like slow snow. It felt almost peaceful, which made it worse. Places like this shouldn't feel peaceful. We took our seats at the long wooden table, the varnish cool beneath my palms. Beth, my lawyer, leaned toward me. She looked tired, not worn out tired, but the kind that comes from carrying other people's battles for too long. Her kind eyes softened when she met mine, and she gave a small nod like she always did before something important. The nod meant, "You're okay, we've got this." I almost believed her. Across the aisle, Richard sat perfectly still, hands folded, charcoal suit pressed to perfection. He looked like a man attending a business meeting, not the dismantling of a family. His face was calm, composed, unreadable. He didn't smile, but the corners of his mouth held that familiar confidence, the kind that always made me feel smaller, even when I knew I shouldn't. His lawyer, tall and polished with razor-sharp lines in his suit, whispered something to him. Richard nodded once, slow eyes forward. He didn't look at us. Not even at hers. The judge entered, silver hair neatly combed back, reading glasses perched low on his nose. He had the posture of someone who'd seen far too much and learned not to take sides too quickly. When he sat, the room shifted, spines straightened, whispers stopped, breaths held. Good morning, he began, voice steady but worn around the edges. He went through the opening formalities, pages turning, names announced, details recorded. His words blurred together, familiar from the meetings, the mediations, the paperwork that had filled the last year of my life. It was all procedure. All steps toward an ending I still wasn't ready for. My hands folded on the table, fingers interlaced so tightly my knuckles turned pale. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, every question, every possible answer, every version of myself I wished I could present. Strong, stable, enough. Beside me, Emma sat straight, backpack resting by her feet, eyes fixed on the judge. Her expression was quiet, too quiet. Not blank, just controlled. I thought she was bracing herself, preparing for the part where adults decided the shape of her life without asking if it fit. Bate nudged a piece of paper toward me, whispering something about custody arrangements. I nodded, though I couldn't hear hers. My heart was beating too loudly in my ears. Then, before the judge could move on, a chair scraped lightly against the floor. Soft but sharp enough to break the room's rhythm. I turned. Emma was standing. For a second, I thought she was adjusting her seat. But then she stepped away from the table. Away from me. Emma, I whispered, reaching out. My fingers brushed air. She kept walking, slow but certain, her shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. The room seemed to lean toward her, every head turning, every breath pausing. The judge looked up, eyebrows lifting. Yes, young lady. Emma stopped in front of him, small in the shadow of the bench but somehow solid. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her shoulders didn't. She looked up at him, chin lifted just enough to show she meant every step she'd taken. Your Honor, she said. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. I have something everyone needs to see. The words hung in the air, fragile and bold at the same time. My stomach tightened, heat rising up the back of my neck. This wasn't in any version of the day I had rehearsed. Beth's hand touched my arm lightly, a silent plea not to move. Across the aisle, Richard finally looked up. His eyes widened just barely, a crack in the mask, then narrowed with something I recognized too well, control slipping. The judge leaned forward, folding his hands. Oh, Miss Emma, she said. My name is Emma. Her voice steadied, like saying her own name anchored her. Do you have permission from your parent or guardian to speak? The judge asked gently. His tone had shifted, softer, cautious. He wasn't dismissing her. He was measuring the moment. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My throat felt tight, words stuck somewhere behind fear and pride. Emma turned slightly, just enough to glance at me. Her eyes searched mine, asking without speaking. I nodded. Barely. But she saw it. She turned back to the judge. My mom said yes. The judge exhaled through his nose, something like patience settling around him. Very well, he said. What is it you'd like to show us? Emma took a breath, a long, shaky one, and reached slowly for the zipper of her backpack. The metal teeth sounded loud in the silence, each inch opening like a curtain pulling back. From where I sat, I could see her fingers trembling. Richard shifted in his seat, leaning forward, jaw tightening. His lawyer whispered urgently, but he didn't respond. His eyes were locked on her. Emma pulled out the small notebook, the same one she'd shown me on the courthouse steps. Worn edges. Bent corner. The cover soft from being held too much. The judge adjusted his glasses. And what is that? It's my life, she said. Her voice thinned, but she didn't look away. It's what it's been like with both of them. A murmur moved through the room, quick and contained. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. The wood beneath my palms suddenly felt too smooth, too hard. All the air in the room seemed to push toward the space between her and the judge. She opened the notebook. Pages fluttered, ink and drawings flashing like brief glimpses of a story no one had asked her to tell. I wrote it down because no one ever asked me, she continued. They just asked about houses and schedules and who forgot what. Her voice trembled again, but she steadied it. No one asked how it felt. The judge's expression softened, something weary in his eyes shifting into attention. Real attention. The kind adults reserve for moments they can't overlook. Behind me, a woman sniffed quietly. A bailiff shifted his weight, boots creaking against the floor. Richard stood suddenly, the motion sharp. His lawyer grabbed his sleeve, whispering harshly, pulling him back into his seat. He sat, but his calm was gone. His hands clenched, knuckles white. Emma lifted the notebook higher. I want you to read this, she said. Because it's the truth, not the arguments. She swallowed hard. And I'm tired of being quiet. The judge leaned back, thoughtful, fingers tapping once on the bench. He didn't dismiss her. He didn't smile. He simply looked at her like she was someone whose voice mattered. And in that moment, she looked taller. Not older, just less small. I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not pride. Something quieter. Like a long-held breath finally leaving my chest. The judge nodded slowly. All right, he said. We'll hear it. His words landed soft, but they rippled through the room. Emma closed the notebook gently, holding it to her chest for a moment like it was fragile. Then she stepped back, turning toward me. Her eyes met mine again, shining uncertain but steady. She walked back down the aisle, each step slow, as if she understood the weight of what she'd just done. When she reached our table, she didn't sit immediately. She rested her hand on the back of my chair, fingers brushing my shoulder. I covered her hand with mine. Her skin felt warm, alive, braver than I had ever been at her age. Outside the windows, a gust of wind lifted the dry leaves, swirling them in a quiet dance. The branches trembled, bare and exposed. But they didn't break. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to speak again. The room leaned forward, waiting. Emma finally sat beside me, notebook still in her lap. She exhaled, barely audible, like she'd just set down something heavy she'd been carrying alone. I squeezed her hand once. She didn't look at me, but her fingers curled gently around mine. And in that small, silent gesture, I knew whatever came next, we would face it together. The judge lifted the first page of her notebook. The room held its breath. Then he began to read. The bailiff's shoes clicked softly against the floor as he crossed the front of the courtroom, the sound measured and steady, like someone counting steps in a quiet hallway. He carried a tablet in both hands, careful, almost reverent, and placed it on a black metal stand facing the judge in the room. The screen slept dark for a moment, reflecting only the ceiling lights and the faint outlines of faces watching. I could feel the air tighten, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. Emma's fingers hovered above the screen, pale against the black frame, trembling just enough to make my own breath catch. Behind us, someone shifted in their seat, fabric brushing against wood. Everything else held still. My heart pounded so loudly I wondered if anyone could hear it. The pulse in my throat felt thick, stubborn, refusing to settle. The judge adjusted his glasses. Whenever you're ready, he said, voice low. The room felt smaller than it had moments before. Walls closing in, air thinning, the lights overhead suddenly harsher. Beth leaned slightly toward me, her hand resting near mine but not touching, a silent offer, not a claim. She understood the weight of silence better than most. Across the aisle, Richard watched with a furrowed brow, confusion flickering across his face but not yet fear. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose like this interruption was inconvenient, nothing more. His lawyer whispered something near his ear, lips tight, but he waved it away. Control had always been his comfort. He believed he still had it. My palms pressed flat against the table, the varnish cold and smooth beneath them. I stared at the tablet as if it might suddenly dissolve. When Richard installed those cameras 2 years ago, he'd framed it as protection. For safety, he'd said, tightening screws into the wall while I held the ladder. For peace of mind. I'd nodded, thinking maybe he was right. Thinking maybe caution was care. Now that same camera felt like a doorway I'd never known existed. Emma swallowed, her small throat moving once. She looked at the judge, then at me. Her eyes were asking again, are you sure? I nodded. The movement was barely there, but she saw it. Her fingertip touched the screen. The video started without sound. Just grainy monochrome footage, the timestamp glowing in the corner. 2:14 a.m. 6 months before everything fell apart. The kitchen appeared first dark, except for the faint glow spilling from the refrigerator door left slightly ajar. That soft blue-white light washed over the counters, the sink, the floor tiles we once argued about replacing. I remembered that night without knowing I remembered it. The kind of memory that hides until someone turns on a light. The back door opened in the video. Richard stepped inside, shoulders slumped, shoes in his hand. His tie hung loose around his neck. I felt a small exhale escape me, familiar posture, familiar hour. He used to come home late often. Work, he said. Always work. But then she entered behind him. A woman. Laughing softly, her hand resting on his shoulder like it belonged there. Her hair fell forward as she leaned into him, mouth close to his ear. My breath caught. Not loud. Just a tiny, sharp sound that felt like glass cracking. In the video, he turned toward her, that smile, the one he rarely showed me anymore, spreading slow and easy across his face. He set his shoes down, reaching for her hand. The refrigerator light caught the curve of her cheek, the shine of her ring, the shadow of their bodies leaning together. The courtroom froze. No one moved. Even the air felt suspended. My vision narrowed, the edges of the room blurring. The weight of my own heartbeat pressed against my ribs. I remembered that night. Waking briefly, hearing the back door, assuming it was the wind. Rolling over, reaching out, finding the empty space beside me still cold. I'd told myself he was working late. That he was tired. That marriage sometimes looked like that. I hadn't known. I truly hadn't known. A soft gasp came from somewhere behind us. A woman whispered something, quickly shushed. The judge's eyes shifted from the screen to Richard, then back again, his expression unreadable but sharper. Bate closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling through her nose. Her hand finally touched mine, just briefly, grounding me. Across the aisle, Richard's face changed. Confusion faded. Control slipped. A flash of panic sharpened his eyes. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Richard didn't look away from the screen. His jaw tightened, muscles in his cheek twitching. Turn it off, he muttered, barely audible. The judge lifted a hand. Let the video play. His voice held no room for argument. On screen, the woman traced her fingers along Richard's collar, laughing again, silent but unmistakably intimate. He kissed her. Not hesitant. Not reluctant. Like someone who had done it before. Comfortable. Certain. My stomach twisted, not with surprise, but with the realization that the truth had been living behind walls I trusted. I stared at the screen, but what hurt most wasn't the kiss. It was the way he looked at her, relaxed, unguarded. He smiled, but not with his eyes when he looked at me. He never did. The refrigerator door closed in the video, plunging the kitchen into darkness. The footage continued, faint outlines moving, shapes merging, disappearing down the hallway toward our bedroom. The bedroom I slept in hours later, believing I was loved. The video paused. Emma's finger hovered again, shaking. She turned to the judge, voice small but steady. He told me Mom was just emotional, that she imagined things. She swallowed hard. But she didn't imagine this. Her words landed like a quiet verdict. Richard stood abruptly, chair scraping back. That video is taken out of. His lawyer grabbed his arm. The judge raised a hand, silencing them both without raising his voice. His gaze shifted to Emma. How long have you known about this? She looked down at her notebook in her lap. A while. I found it when I was looking for old birthday videos. She hesitated. I didn't know if I should show it. I thought maybe it wasn't my place. She lifted her eyes again, meeting his gaze directly. But then everyone kept asking who we should live with, and no one asked why we left. The judge leaned back, expression softening in a way that made something inside my chest ache. Thank you, he said quietly, for telling the truth. The courtroom remained still, stunned, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the moment. Outside the tall windows, clouds drifted across the pale sky, dimming the light in the room. Shadows stretched across the floor like long, slow-moving water. Emma returned to her seat, her steps slower now. When she sat beside me, she didn't look up. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the tablet stand, knuckles white. I placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Her small fingers curled into my palm, holding on. The judge cleared his throat. "We will take a brief recess." His gavel tapped once soft but final. People began to move, whispers rising like distant wind. I stayed seated. Emma stayed beside me. On the screen, frozen in blue light, the kitchen remained still, refrigerator glow casting faint illumination on a truth that had been waiting in the dark. And as I stared at it, I felt the smallest shift inside me. Not relief. Not victory. Just a quiet certainty. The darkness had been named. And nothing would ever be the same. The moment the video resumed, the room seemed to shrink around us. The screen glowed softly in the dim courtroom light, that cold, bluish-toned security footage always has, like the world it captured was happening underwater. Richard and the woman drifted back into view, shapes moving through my kitchen, their shadows stretching across the tile floor I once scrubbed on my hands and knees. Her laugh floated out first, low and breathy, brushing against the microphone with an intimacy that felt invasive, like an unwanted whisper pressed against my own ear. I gripped the edge of the table. My fingers tingled. Someone behind me shifted, but the sound barely reached me. All I could see was the way she touched him, light, familiar, without hesitation. Like she had every right. The kitchen in the video looked exactly as it had then. The fruit bowl on the counter. Emma's school permission slips tucked under a magnet shaped like a sunflower. The chipped mug that read "Good morning," beautiful, the one he'd given me years before, back when gestures still meant something. The refrigerator light painted everything in pale blue. It made the scene feel colder than I remembered that house ever being. Their voices were low, muffled by distance, but still clear enough. She called him a baby. Soft, playful, possessive. He laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from him in months at the time, and replied, "Be patient." The word curled in the air like smoke. That was when the sickness clenched deep inside my stomach. Not just jealousy. Not just betrayal. The woman was younger. Much younger. Her skin smooth, her movements carefree, her voice without the weight of mortgages, bedtime routines, or years of trying to hold a family together. She moved like someone untouched by consequence. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but no tears came. My body was too stunned for that. It was the kind of pain that froze you first. They drifted toward the kitchen table, our table. The place where Emma and I had eaten breakfast every morning, where she practiced spelling words, where we carved pumpkins and painted Easter eggs, where she cried over math homework and where I'd held her after nightmares. Seeing them sit there felt like someone digging fingers into a bruise I didn't know still existed. The woman leaned in close, her hand sliding up his arm. He brushed hair from her face with a tenderness that used to make me feel chosen. Protected. He kissed her. Not hurried. Not guilty. Just comfortable. Familiar. A quiet sound escaped me, not quite a gasp, more like air collapsing in my chest. Beside me, Bates' breath caught too, though she kept her posture straight. Her fingers twitched toward mine, then stopped, respecting the space I needed to break quietly. Across the room, Richard stiffened. His jaw worked, teeth grinding. His lawyer leaned closer, whispering rapid instructions, but Richard barely blinked. His face had gone pale under the courtroom lighting. Still, he didn't look at me. Not once. The timestamp in the corner ticked slowly forward. 2:14 a.m. 2:21. 2:29. 20 minutes. 20 minutes of whispered conversation, laughter, kisses. Comfort and routine. Not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness. A pattern. A life he'd built quietly alongside the one I thought we shared. In the video, the woman finally stood, brushing invisible crumbs from her skirt. She kissed him again, quick and practiced, then slipped toward the back door. He followed her, hand lingering at her waist. He watched her step outside, glanced once into the darkness, then closed the door slowly behind her, turning the lock with the same care he'd used when locking up after Emma went to bed. Then he checked his phone, thumb moving across the screen in a familiar gesture. Probably texting her. "Good night. Get home safe. Can't wait to see you again." The ordinary cruelty of it made my throat tighten. He slipped the phone into his pocket and headed toward the stairs. Toward the bedroom. Toward me. Toward the warm space where I slept, dreaming beside an empty pillow, believing he was exhausted from work. The camera caught the faint outline of him disappearing up the steps, then nothing but silence and stillness. Emma paused the video. The screen froze on the empty kitchen, refrigerator glow casting a lonely square of light across the floor. A chair slightly pulled out. 2 glasses on the table. A forgotten napkins. The kind of details that make you realize life was happening around you without your knowledge. The room was so quiet you could hear someone's watch ticking. A slow, steady beat cutting through the silence. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt heavier than the last. My breath felt stuck somewhere between my ribs and my throat. I stared at the frozen image, unable to look away. The kitchen looked almost peaceful, as if it had already forgotten what happened inside it. I remembered waking up that night, rolling toward his empty side of the bed, pulling the blanket around me, thinking he must be working late again, never imagining he was locking the door after another woman. I pressed my fingers to my lips without realizing I'd moved. They felt cold. Bait leaned slightly toward me. You didn't know, she whispered, barely audible. I shook my head. Tiny, mechanical, the only movement I was capable of. Across the aisle, Richard finally looked at me. Not with regret, not with apology, with a fear, real fear. As if this moment, not the affair, was the one thing he never anticipated. The one thing he couldn't control. His lawyer tugged his sleeve again, whispering urgently, but he didn't respond. His eyes flicked to Emma, then back to me. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Nothing came out. Emma stood beside the tablet, breathing slowly. Her shoulders rose and fell, steadying herself. Her hand hovered over the screen again, but she didn't press play. Instead, she looked at the judge. This, she said softly, is why we left. The words were simple, unadorned, but they cracked through the silence like a quiet truth finally spoken aloud. The judge folded his hands, studying her. His expression changed, not shock, but understanding. A weight settling into his eyes. Around us, no one moved. Even the bailiff stood frozen, one hand resting on the back of a chair. The ticking continued. Steady, unrelenting. Tick, tick, tick. Each second marking a life that had already broken months ago and was only now being witnessed. I exhaled slowly, a breath that felt years overdue. The tightness in my chest loosened, not fully, but enough to breathe again. Not relief. Not closure. Just truth. Truth filling the space where doubt used to live. The judge finally spoke. His voice quiet, deliberate. This evidence will be entered into record. His tone left no room for argument. Richard flinched. His lawyer sank back in his chair, defeated. The video screen dimmed slightly, still frozen on that patch of blue light. Emma returned to her seat beside me, her steps soft. When she sat, she didn't look at me. But her hand found mine under the table, fingers curling tightly. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of her grip anchor me. The kitchen on the screen glowed silently, the refrigerator light still casting its lonely square. And as the judge called for the next motion, I felt something shift, a quiet beginning carved out of the ruins. The truth had been seen, and there was no going back. Richard's lawyer shot to his feet so fast his chair rocked backward. Objection, he barked, papers fluttering in his hand like startled birds. But the judge lifted one hand, slow and steady, palm outward. The gesture cut through the room sharper than any gavel. No, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it held weight. I want to see the rest. The lawyer froze mid-sentence, lips still parted. Then he sat, movements stiff, like his joints had rusted. The courtroom settled into a hush, so complete I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling lights. The tablet screen glowed again, waiting. Emma's fingers hovered over the play icon, small and pale, trembling just enough to betray her nerves. She took a breath, long, shaky, then pressed the screen. The next clip flickered into life. Different timestamp. Different night. Same kitchen. 2:47 a.m. The back door opened silently just as before. That woman slipped in, hair damp from rain, shoulders hunched. Her voice was clearer this time, edged with something raw. She was crying. The sound seeped into the room like cold water quiet broken. She pressed her face into Richard's chest, sobbing into the fabric of his shirt. He wrapped his arms around her, murmuring something soft, almost tender. He stroked her hair. He kissed the top of her head. He held her the way I used to dream he might hold me again. I felt nothing and everything all at once. My body numb, my mind buzzing like static. It was like watching a stranger's life, wearing my furniture, using my kitchen, moving through the spaces I once called home. My throat tightened but no sound came. Not even breath. Another clip began before I could steady myself. Different month. 1:03 a.m. The kitchen lights were on this time, casting warm gold across the counters. For a moment, the scene looked almost domestic, ordinary, two people talking after a late night out. Then Richard reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Thick, white, bulging at the edges. He slid it across the table toward her. She looked down at it, hesitated, then opened it. Stacks of bills spilled slightly from the top. She whispered something, voice trembling. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The intimacy of the gesture felt louder than the money. Behind me, someone inhaled sharply. Beth's pen scratched furiously across her legal pad, ink carving frantic lines into paper. I caught quick glimpses of her handwriting. Financial support. Ongoing relationship. Pattern. She was building a case. I was watching my life unravel. The third clip started almost immediately. Another night. Another month. The same woman. The same door. The same familiarity. She entered laughing again, shoes in hand, tiptoeing across the tile like she belonged there. He met her halfway, lifting her off the ground briefly, spinning her just enough to make her giggle. A sound he'd never made for me. Not in years. The timestamp blinked in the corner, each number a quiet accusation. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment. This was routine. 20 minutes. Again. Always 20 minutes before she slipped out the back and he returned upstairs, sliding in beside me like nothing had happened. Like I was too asleep to notice he smelled like someone else's perfume. Maybe I was. My vision blurred, but not with tears, just distance. It felt like I was floating above myself, watching a woman who looked like me sit frozen in a courtroom, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles shone white. I felt light. Detached. Like my body had decided to protect me by leaving me behind. I stared at the screen, but the images no longer felt real. They flickered like scenes from a film I didn't remember auditioning for. When I finally tore my eyes away, I looked at Richard. His face had drained of color. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle pulsed near his ear. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look at me, eyes fixed on an invisible point beyond the judge's bench. He looked small, not physically, but in spirit. Like the confidence he wore had been stripped away, leaving something hollow. He still wouldn't look at me. Not once. The judge leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench. His expression had shifted, less procedural, more human. He studied Emma for a long moment. Then he asked one question, voice steady but gentle. How did you get this footage? The room held its breath. Every head turned toward her. Even Richard flinched, eyes snapping in her direction for the first time that day. Emma stood a little straighter. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the tablet, but her voice, when it came, was steady. I checked the app every night. Her words landed quietly, but they rippled through the room like thunder in the distance. She swallowed, gaze fixed on the judge. I wanted to know why Dad stopped saying goodnight. Silence. Real silence. Not courtroom silence filled with shuffling and breaths and tension, but the kind that sinks into bone. The kind that follows truth. I felt something inside me crack, not loud, not dramatic. Just a small, precise break, like a thread finally snapping after being stretched too thin for too long. All those nights she'd asked if he was coming home. All those mornings she'd been quiet at the breakfast table. All those times she'd watched him walk past her bedroom door without stopping. She hadn't been asleep. She'd been watching, waiting, trying to understand why the father who used to tuck her in suddenly stopped. The thought made my chest ache in a way I didn't know how to carry. Not for myself. For her. For every unanswered goodnight. The judge nodded slowly, eyes softening with something like sorrow. Thank you, he said. Not as a judge. As a person. Richard shifted, breathing hard through his nose. His lawyer leaned in again, whispering frantically, but he didn't respond. His hands shook. Just slightly. I looked at Emma. She didn't look back. Her gaze remained on the frozen kitchen image, jaw set, shoulders squared in a way that made her look older than she should ever have to be. The ticking of a watch echoed again, measured patience. Time moving even when lives paused. Tick, tick, tick. The judge leaned back. We will continue, he said quietly. But to me, the moment had already shifted. The lies were visible now. Not whispered. Not hidden. Seen, witnessed, recorded. And as Emma sat down beside me, her arm brushing mine, I realized something quietly devastating. She had carried the truth alone for months. And now that it was spoken aloud, nothing would ever return to what it had been. Not the marriage. Not the silence. Not the nights waiting for footsteps that never came. The back door had opened, and all the light had come spilling through. When the screen went dark, the silence didn't last. It shattered. Whispers erupted across the courtroom like wind through dry leaves, sharp, rustling, impossible to ignore. People leaned toward each other, hands covering mouths, eyes wide. It was the kind of sound that carried judgment, curiosity, and something cruel beneath it. I felt every stare. They pressed against my skin like heat. The judge reached for his gavel, tapping it once. Order. The voices dipped, then surged again. He tapped harder. Order in the court. The sound cracked through the room, and the whispers fell into uneasy quiet. My pulse thudded in my throat. I could still see that kitchen in the blue glow burned into the backs of my eyelids. Her laugh, his hands, that envelope, all of it replaying in loops. Bate stood quickly, chair legs scraping across the floor. Your Honor, we request a brief recess to. Denied, the judge said, cutting her off without looking away from the bench. His voice held none of the softness from earlier. I want answers now. The words hit like cold water. I turned to Bate, but she only pressed her lips together, eyes narrowing in calculation. She was already rearranging strategy in her head, but the judge's tone told us one thing clearly. This moment mattered. Right now. Across the aisle, Richard's lawyer stood as well, smoothing the front of his expensive suit like the fabric might give him control. Your Honor, this footage is irrelevant to custody and asset division, he said, voice sharp, practiced. It should not. The judge didn't even blink. Sit down. The lawyer froze. Sir, sit down. The room held its breath. Then the lawyer lowered himself slowly into his seat, jaw clenched, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. For the first time that day, a flicker of satisfaction stirred in me. Small, brief, gone too quickly. Because the judge's attention was shifting. Toward us. Toward him. Toward the truth hanging thick in the air. My hands trembled in my lap. Not from shock anymore. From something heavier. I could feel my voice rising inside me, like a tide pushing against a dam that had held too long. Before I could stop it, I heard myself speak. Who is she? The words came out louder than I expected, carrying across the room. Clear, unmistakable. My own voice startled me. It had been so long since I'd spoken to him without shrinking. Without weighing every syllable. Richard's head jerked slightly as if someone had struck him. He stared straight ahead, refusing to turn. I tried again, quieter but sharper. Who is she, Richard? His throat bobbed. A muscle feathered along his jaw. His lawyer leaned toward him, voice low and urgent. Do not answer that. Richard swallowed. He obeyed. He stayed silent. He wouldn't look at me. Not with anger. Not with regret. Not with anything. He stared forward like the wall might open and swallow him whole. For a moment, I felt weightless. Like the floor had shifted beneath me. Then another voice cut through the tension. Not his. Emma's. She's Vanessa Collier. The words dropped into the courtroom like a stone into still water, rippling outward, unavoidable. Every head turned toward her. Even Richard finally looked up, eyes widening. My breath caught. My heart stuttered. Emma reached into her backpack with steady hands and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not notebook pages this time. Not ink and drawings. A printed screenshot. She stood and held it up with both hands, arm trembling only slightly. This is her. The judge motioned for the bailiffs. He crossed the room quickly, taking the paper from Emma and delivering it to the bench. But I could see it clearly from where I sat. A social media profile. Smiling photo. Bright eyes. Wavy hair. Younger. So much younger. Under the picture text. Name Vanessa Collier. Age 26. Occupation staff nurse, Maple Ridge Hospital. My stomach twisted. The room wavered. The air thinned. Hospital. Where Richard worked. Where he was a senior administrator. My world tilted sideways. The edges of my vision blurred. Because suddenly I remembered. She wasn't just a stranger. She had been in my house. Standing in my kitchen. Smiling politely. Holding a glass of lemonade I had poured for her. I remembered her laugh. Soft, shy, looking around our home like she was studying it. I remembered thinking she seemed sweet. Young, nervous around all the administrators and spouses. I remembered telling her, if you ever need anything, you can always call, we're family here. My throat tightened painfully. I had welcomed her, opened my door, served her drinks, introduced her to neighbors. All while she was walking through that same back door at night. Laughing, crying, being held by my husband. The betrayal didn't hit like fire. It hit like ice. Cold, deep, spreading through my ribs. Across from us, Richard finally moved. He reached for the paper, but the judge held it back. Mr. Lawson, the judge said, voice low and controlled, were you engaged in a relationship with this woman? Richard's lawyer stood so abruptly his chair legs screeched. Do not answer that. The judge turned slowly, eyes narrowing. I did not ask you. The lawyer froze again, hands suspended midair. He lowered himself back down like a man sinking into cold water. Richard stared at the table. Silent, jaw tight. His silence was louder than any confession. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Numbness settling like dust after an explosion. My voice sounded distant when I spoke, almost detached. She was in our house. No one responded. No one needed to. The memory flickered through me, her standing in our living room, complimenting the photos on the mantel, smiling at Emma, calling her sweetheart. And me handing her lemonade, thinking I was being kind. Kindness had made me blind. The judge set the paper down carefully. His expression shifted, not anger, but something like disappointment. Something older. Wearier. He looked at Emma. How did you find this? She lifted her chin. Steady. Strong. I searched Dad's contacts, she said. Her name kept showing up. Her voice wavered just once. And she liked all our vacation photos. The simplicity of it hurt more than anything else. She had been watching our lives. And I hadn't seen her watching mine. The whispers began again, softer this time, like people couldn't help themselves. The judge didn't silence them. He let them sit in the air, consequences settling. Richard sank back in his chair, pale and still. His hands clenched together, knuckles pressed white. He looked smaller, like the truth had shrunk him. He still wouldn't look at me. That somehow hurt most. Not the affair, not the lies, not the woman's. The refusal to face the damage. To face me. To face her. The judge tapped his pen once against the bench, thoughtful. This changes context, he said quietly. Significantly. The courtroom shifted again. A ripple of understanding. A turning point. I felt my breath catch. Not from pain this time. From realization. The story was no longer just about betrayal. It was about exposure. About truth finally stepping into the light. And there was no putting it back in the dark. The judge looked toward the attorneys. We proceed, he said. No recess. His gaze moved to me. Then to Emma. Continue. The word felt like a door opening. Or closing. I wasn't sure which. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Nothing about our lives would ever look the same after the moment Vanessa Collier's name entered that room. The courtroom still hummed with whispers when Bates stood. Not hurried. Not flustered. Just rising slowly, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment to breathe. The overhead lights caught the silver strands in her hair, turning them into faint threads of brightness. She adjusted her glasses with one calm motion, then placed a thick folder on the table with a soft, deliberate tap. That sound traveled farther than it should have. Paper meeting wood. Truth meeting air. I felt the shift before she said a word. Something tightening. Something inevitable. She cleared her throat. Your Honor, she began, voice steady, the evidence presented today raises questions regarding financial conduct. The judge looked at her over his glasses, eyes sharp. Proceed. Richard's lawyer jerked upright. Your Honor, this line of. The judge didn't even look at him. She may proceed. The lawyer sank back down, flustered. The first crack in his polished armor. Bate opened the folder. Pages slid apart like wings unfolding. I saw the labels. Dates, amounts, bank logos. My stomach tightened. I didn't know what they meant yet. But some part of me, the part that had spent years trying to ignore signs, already did. Bate turned toward the judge. These are financial records subpoenaed 2 months ago, she said. Records the opposing counsel claimed did not exist. Richard's lawyer stiffened. That is a gross. Bate raised a hand, palm outwards. Let's not waste the court's time. Then she tapped the top sheet. A series of transfers, she said. Beginning 18 months ago. I leaned forward without meaning to. Numbers stared up from the page. $1,200. $3,500. $5,000. Regular. Monthly. Growing. Each amount carrying a date I recognized. Birthdays. Anniversaries. Nights he'd come home late. I felt my breath catch. The room tilted a little. Bate continued, her voice still calm, almost gentle. All transferred into an account belonging to. She paused, flicking her eyes toward Richard. Vanessa Collier. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Soft gasp. Quiet murmurs. The sound of realization spreading. My hands tightened in my lap until my nails pressed crescents into my skin. He hadn't just given her time. He'd given her money. Our money. Bate pulled another document from the folder. A lease agreement. The paper looked ordinary, printed on standard white stock. But the address printed at the top hit like a blow. Downtown. Near the river. The expensive part of town. The place I once said would be perfect if we ever decided to move closer to his work. He had agreed. Said maybe someday. But someday had already happened. Just not for us. Bate held it up for the judge. Signed by Ms. Collier, she said. And co-signed by Mr. Lawson. My vision blurred. Not from tears. Just from the weight of realization pressing down all at once. He built another life. A home. While I was patching walls and clipping coupons. While I was apologizing for asking why he worked so late. Another paper. A credit card statement. Jewelry store. Hotels. Restaurants. Weekend trips. Cities we had talked about visiting someday. Places I had saved brochures for. His handwriting on the receipts. His signature at the bottom. My throat tightened until breathing felt like swallowing gravel. These weren't guesses. They weren't suspicions whispered to myself in the dark. They were facts. Line by line. Date by date. Proof of every moment I'd told myself I was overthinking. Paranoid. Emotional. I had gaslit myself long before he ever needed to. Richard's lawyer leapt to his feet again. This is a private matter, he insisted, voice sharp and strained. It has no bearing on custody or division of assets. The judge's gaze hardened. Counsel, he said slowly, privacy ends the moment divorce proceedings begin. The lawyer opened his mouth. Closed it. Sat back down. He didn't look confident anymore. He looked cornered. Richard stared at the table, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching. His hands were balled into fists, white-knuckled, but he still wouldn't look at me. That avoidance hurt worse than any document in Bates' folder. Bate lifted the final sheet. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence settle, a deliberate pause giving weight to the moment. Then, a joint bank account. My breath froze. My name was not on it. His was. Hers was. The air left my lungs in a slow, unsteady exhale. They weren't just lovers. They were partners. Financially, practically, intentionally. A life planned, funded, maintained. While I folded laundry. While I planned meals. While I waited for footsteps that never came. The judge leaned back, expression darkening. His voice dropped low. "Mr. Lawson," he said, "did you use marital assets to fund this relationship?" The question hung in the air. Heavy, final. Everyone looked at Richard. Even I did. For the first time since the video ended, he moved. Just slightly. A flinch. His eyes flicked upward, meeting mine for half a second. In that look, I expected anger. Or guilt. Or shame. But what I saw was worse. Fear. Not fear of hurting me. Fear of being exposed. I felt something inside me harden. Not bitterness. Not rage. Clarity. His lawyer leaned in close, whispering harshly. "Do not answer." Richard swallowed. His mouth opened. Closed. He said nothing. His silence spread through the room like ink dropping into water. Dark. Irrefutable. The judge nodded once. Noted. That single word felt more decisive than any confession. My body felt distant, like I was sitting behind myself. Watching a woman in a courtroom learn that the life she built had been hollowed out from the inside. All the times I'd wondered if I was imagining the distance. All the nights I'd told myself he was tired. All the apologies I'd made for feelings I couldn't name. They crystallized into one truth. I had not been wronged. I had been ignored. Dismissed. Distracted. Replaced. And I had done half the replacing for him by shrinking myself to fit the space he left. The judge folded his hands. "We will take this into serious consideration," he said quietly. His tone had changed. No longer neutral. No longer procedural. There was judgment in it now. And consequence. The whispers rose again, softer, stunned. Paper rustled. Someone coughed. The courtroom breathed. I sat very still. Emma's hand found mine under the tables. Warm, steady. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her fingers tightened, grounding me in a way nothing else could. I exhaled slowly, the breath shaking as it left. The judge looked up. "Proceed," he said. But I knew. In that quiet moment, with documents spread across the table and silence hanging heavy, that something fundamental had shifted. Not just in the case. In me. The story was no longer about betrayal hidden in shadows. It was about truth written in numbers and signatures. Irrefutable. Unavoidable. The courtroom lights gleamed off the papers. Cold, clinical, final. And I understood with a hollow ache and a strange steadiness that what had broken was never going to be rebuilt. Not the marriage. Not the trust. Not the life I once imagined. The ledger had spoken. And the damage was accounted for. The judge's voice cut through the lingering whispers like a soft blade. "Emma," he said, leaning slightly forward, "do you wish to speak?" For a moment, the room held still. The kind of stillness that comes before a first snowfall or before a confession someone has carried too long. Emma lifted her head. She didn't look at me. She looked at the judge, then gave a single, quiet nod. My hand moved instinctively toward hers, fingers reaching for the comfort I'd always tried to give. But she stepped forward before I could touch her. Her chair slid back with the faintest scrape, delicate but final, like a page turning. She walked toward the center of the courtroom, small shoes tapping softly on the polished floor. 13 years old. Small for her age. Shoulders narrow beneath her sweater. And yet somehow she looked older than I'd ever seen her. Straighter, steadier, as though every heavy moment of the past year had settled into her bones and taught her how to stand. The judge folded his hands. "Take your time," he said gently. Emma nodded again. She glanced briefly at the gallery, rows of strangers, attorneys, families waiting for their own turns at unraveling. A few eyes softened when they saw her. Others widened, curious. She took a breath. It hitched just once. Then she spoke. "It was hard to live there," she began, voice quiet but clear. The microphone picked up every syllable, amplifying it into the silent room. The words seemed too big for her size, but she held them anyway. "Nights when Dad came home late," she continued, "I'd stay awake, I'd listen for his footsteps." Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. Not fidgeting, just anchoring. Sometimes he didn't come up the stairs, sometimes he went straight to the basement or the kitchen, sometimes. She swallowed. He smelled like perfume that wasn't my mom's. A rustle moved through the courtroom, a sound like fabric brushing stone. Someone exhaled sharply. Emma didn't flinch. "And in the mornings," she said, "he forgot things." Her eyes lifted to the judge, steady. "My dance recital, my science fair, the birthday dinner Mom planned for me." I felt something collapse inside my ribs, quietly but completely. I remembered that night, the candles burning down, wax pooling, Emma pushing her cake around her plate while I called his phone again and again. "He stopped being my dad," she said softly. Not dramatic, not bitter, just stating a fact. The words floated into the space above us, impossibly heavy. Richard shifted in his seat. His shoulders tightened. His jaw clenched. But he still didn't look at her. The judge watched him for a moment, then returned his gaze to Emma. She continued, voice thinner now but unbroken. "And he stopped being her husband," she said, nodding slightly toward me. "But he never told us." She took another breath, this one shakier. "He just..." Her throat tightened. She blinked hard. "He just left," she whispered. While still living there. Silence wrapped the room. Not tense, irreverent. Like everyone recognized the truth in her small voice. Her chin trembled once. Her shoulders lifted in a tiny breath. But she didn't cry. She stood there steady and open, holding her story without apology. I couldn't. Tears slipped down my cheeks, quiet and hot. I didn't wipe them away. They felt like they belonged to a version of me who had spent too long pretending not to feel. Somewhere behind us, a soft sob broke. A stranger, a woman in a dark coat, clutching a folder to her chest, pressed a tissue to her mouth. She hadn't come for us. She had come for another case, another heartbreak waiting its turn. But she stayed. And now she cried. Maybe she recognized something. Maybe she carried her own quiet livings. Her own back door. Her own silence. Courtrooms are full of ghosts like that. Emma looked at me then. Not for reassurance, for connection. Her eyes were glassy but bright, shining with something fierce and fragile all at once. She didn't ask if she'd said too much. She didn't apologize. For the first time, I saw not just my daughter. I saw the girl who checked security footage alone at night. Who looked for reasons her father didn't say goodnight. Who learned to hold truth in both hands without dropping it. And I realized she had been carrying far more than I ever knew. The judge cleared his throat, but the sound wavered slightly. He reached for his water glass, hand trembling almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Miss Lawson," he said. His voice was different now, gentler, heavier. Like her words had settled into him too. "You may return to your seat." Emma nodded. Just once. Then she turned. Her steps back toward me were slow, deliberate. Her shoulders squared. Her chin lifted. Halfway, she faltered, just a tiny stutter in her movement. Not weakness. Release. I rose before she reached the table. My chair scraped softly, a fragile sound in the quiet room. When she sat, I reached for her hand again. This time, she let me take it. Her palm was warm. Her fingers laced through mine, firm and sure. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, breathing slowly. But the pressure of her hand told me everything. She wasn't alone anymore. Neither was I. Behind us, the stranger with the tissue sniffed, her breath catching. Someone else murmured, "Poor kid." Another whispered, "Good for her." The judge tapped his pen lightly against the bench, a thoughtful rhythm. Tick, 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 time moving again. The moment settling into history. I looked at Richard. Really looked. His face was pale. His mouth a thin line. His eyes hollow, fixed on the table as though the grain of the wood might save him. He looked like a man listening to a story he didn't recognize, even though he was the one who wrote it. He still wouldn't look at her. That absence, that refusal, hurt more than all the evidence spread across the table. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Lawson," he said quietly, "do you have anything to say in response to your daughter's statement?" The room froze again. Richard opened his mouth. Closed it. His lawyer whispered urgently, shaking his head. For a heartbeat, I thought Richard might speak. Might finally acknowledge what he'd taken. But he didn't. He lowered his gaze. His silence filled the room like smoke. Emma's fingers tightened around mine. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply breathed. In, out, like someone who had finally put down a weight. The judge nodded, expression solemn. "Very well," he said. He reached for his notes, but his eyes lingered on Emma one moment longer. Not pitying. Respectful. Something had shifted. Not just in the case. In the room. In us. The courtroom exhaled as one. Paper rustled. A chair creaked. The stranger dabbed her eyes again. I brushed a tear from my cheek with the back of my hand. It trembled. Not from grief. From something quieter. Steadier. Pride. Emma released my hand slowly, resting hers in her lap. Her shoulders softened. Her breathing evened. The judge spoke again, voice firm. "We will proceed." But I knew the moment had already closed like a book with a ribbon marking the page. The story had turned, and the chapter belonged to her. The small girl who stepped forward, who spoke truth without shouting, who held her own heart steady in a room full of strangers. As the judge called the next motion, I looked at my daughter and understood. The silence in our house had never been emptiness. It had been waiting. For her voice. The air in the courtroom felt heavier after Emma sat down. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and indifferent, casting pale rectangles across polished wood and tired faces. I wiped a tear from my cheek with the back of my hand, the motion small, almost private. Across the aisle, Richard stared at the table, unmoving, as if hiding in the grain of the wood might undo everything. Then a rustle. His chair scraped against the floor. Slow, deliberate. He stood. A hush rolled through the room, soft but deep, like wind passing through tall grass. Even the judge paused, pen suspended above the page. Against his lawyer's whispered warning, Richard rose to his full height, straightening his suit jacket with a trembling hand. He cleared his throat. And for the first time that day, he looked up. "I need to say something," he began. His voice was low, rough around the edges. The kind of voice that had once comforted me in the dark, murmuring promises of tomorrow. Now it only tightened something inside my chest. His lawyer leaned toward him sharply. "Richard, don't." He shook his head. Not at her. At himself. Like he'd already decided the damage was done. He turned toward the judge, shoulders stiff. "I didn't intend for any of this to happen," he said. "I never meant to hurt anyone's." A familiar line. One I'd heard people say in movies, in stories, in whispered conversations outside grocery stores. Never meant to hurt anyone's. As though intention softened impact. He took a breath. "Our marriage," he continued, glancing briefly in my direction, "was already over." Something inside me recoiled. Not because I hadn't feared he believed that, but because hearing it spoken aloud felt like a door slamming shut. He kept talking. "She checked out years ago." The words hit harder than I expected. He didn't look at me when he said them. He stared at the judge, as though the only truth that mattered was the one he constructed for someone wearing a robe. "I felt invisible in my own home," he said. "Unwanted, unseen." His hands gestured once, palms up, a plea for understanding. "As a man, you need to feel needed." A few people in the gallery shifted, uncomfortable. Someone let out a faint scoff. I sat perfectly still. Heat prickled behind my eyes, but no tears came this time. Invisible. Unseen. He had no idea how many nights I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, waiting for him to roll toward me. He never did. How many times I reached for conversation, for closeness, for anything, only to be met with silence or the blue glow of his phone. He said I checked out, but he never noticed how hard I tried to stay in. He continued, voice gaining confidence as though he believed the narrative he was weaving. Vanessa didn't ruin anything, he said. She just came into a space that was already empty. I heard someone inhale sharply. Maybe bait. Maybe the woman in the back row. Maybe May. She made me feel alive again, he added, quieter. Wanted. He didn't apologize. Not once. He justified. Explained. Defended. As though betrayal could be softened by loneliness. As though neglect excused deceit. The judge's expression didn't change. Stone-faced. Unmoved. When Richard finally paused, his lawyer reached for his sleeve, whispering urgently. Sit, please. But he stayed standing, breathing unevenly. Waiting for something, understanding maybe. Forgiveness. Vindication. He would not find it here. The judge leaned back slowly. He folded his hands, fingers interlaced. Mr. Lawson, he said, voice calm but edged with steel, I have one question. The room tightened like fabric pulled taut. Richard nodded, bracing. The judge's eyes locked onto his. Did you tell your wife the marriage was over before you started this affair? A silence followed, deep and immediate. Richard blinked. His mouth opened. We both knew. The judge lifted a hand, cutting him off. That is not what I asked. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words struck clean and sharp. Richard's composure slipped. He hesitated. His throat worked. Nothing followed. His silence filled the courtroom, thicker than any answer could have been. He looked down. His shoulders sagged. The confident man who had stood to reclaim his dignity now looked small, deflated. The judge nodded once. Sit down. It wasn't a request. Richard lowered himself into the chair slowly, like the weight of his own choices forced him downward. His lawyer closed her folder with a soft, resigned thud. That sound was final. Like a door shutting. Like the last nail being tapped into something already buried. Everyone in the room understood it. This was over. Not just the testimony. Not just the argument. The fight for perception. The illusion. The excuses. All of it collapsed under one unanswered question. I stared at him. At the man I once trusted with every corner of my heart. At the father of my child. He didn't look up. He didn't look at me. Or at Emma. Or at anyone's. His eyes stayed fixed on his hands, clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as the man I loved. Not as the man I feared losing. But as someone who had walked away long before he ever physically left. Someone who built a new life in shadows instead of speaking truth aloud. Someone who ran from discomfort instead of facing it. A slow exhale left me trembling at the edges. Tears slid down my cheeks again, not sharp and painful this time, but warm, sad, and strangely freeing. Because in that moment, I understood something. He hadn't replaced me because I failed. He replaced me because he left himself. And no one can fill a void like that. The judge tapped his pen once. The sound echoed. Proceedings continued. Voices resumed. Papers rustled. But the emotional temperature in the room had shifted permanently. People no longer watched him with curiosity. They watched with disappointment, with quiet judgment, with understanding. Every person in that room knew the truth now. He had chosen silence over honesty, secrecy over courage, escape over responsibility. And it had cost him everything. Emma squeezed my hand again. I looked down at her small fingers wrapped around mine. She didn't look at me. She stared forward, lips pressed into a thin line. Calm, steady, a child who had seen too much and spoken anyway. The judge's voice broke through the murmurs. "We will proceed with findings," he said. But I barely heard him, because all I could feel was the quiet settling inside me. The first quiet that didn't hurt. Not absence. Not waiting. Not silence used as punishment. Just space. The space where truth had finally been spoken. Richard lowered his head into his hands. His shoulders rose and fell once in a shuddering breath. His lawyer stared straight ahead, eyes distant, already calculating the next steps in a case she knew she could no longer win. The room moved on. He couldn't. As the judge turned the page in his file, I realized something with a clarity that shook me gently. This wasn't the moment I lost my marriage. That moment had happened long ago, quietly in the spaces between footsteps and closed doors. This was simply the moment everyone else finally saw it. The moment the truth stopped whispering and spoke aloud. And nothing in our lives would ever return to silence again. The judge's glasses caught the light when he looked up, a thin glint across the lenses that made it hard to see his eyes. For a moment, everything in the courtroom stilled, the shuffle of papers, the soft coughs, even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. It felt like the air itself was waiting. Waiting for a sentence that would split a life into before and after. I realized I'd been holding my breath. My lungs ached tight and shallow. The judge cleared his throat, a small sound that echoed far more than it should have. "We're going to resolve this now," he said. The word now sank into my bones. It's funny the details your mind clings to when everything is about to change. The grain of the wood on the table in front of me. The way the flag in the corner barely moved in the draft from the vent. The faint ticking of someone's watch 3 rows back, steady and unbothered. Time moves whether you shatter or not. Bates sat to my left, pen resting still for the first time that day. To my right, Emma sat straight, hands folded, chin slightly lifted. Her backpack leaned against her chair, the edge of her notebook peeking out. Across the aisle, Richard stared at the table, his shoulders slumped in a way that made his expensive suit look too big. His lawyer sat rigid, lips pressed so tightly together they'd gone colorless. The judge shuffled his papers, then set them down as though he wasn't going to need them anymore. "I have heard enough," he said. My heart tripped. He started with the facts. Judges always start with the facts. "On the matter of custody," he said, voice firm, measured, "this court finds that it is in the best interest of the child for primary and full legal and physical custody to be awarded to the mother, Claire Lawson." The words came slow, each one landing like a soft, undeniable weight. Full custody. I didn't realize I'd been bracing for a different answer until my shoulders suddenly dropped, like a rope somewhere inside me had finally loosened. "Mr. Lawson's petition for joint custody," the judge continued, "is denied." I heard faintly the sound of Richard's lawyer exhaling through her nose. The rustle of movement as someone in the back shifted in their seat. But right next to me, Emma didn't move. She just stared ahead, eyes fixed on the judge. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply listened to the shape of her future being spoken out loud. "The marital home," the judge went on, "is to remain with Mrs. Lawson and the minor child. Our house, the sagging porch, the chipped railing, the hallway with the scuffed baseboards from years of sock sliding and toy collisions, the bedroom where I'd lain awake so many nights, the kitchen where I'd poured lemonade for a woman I should never have had to know." I pictured the bird-shaped water stain on the ceiling. Its wings had always looked like they were caught mid-flight. For the first time, it didn't feel like it was mocking me. It felt like it might actually be going somewhere. "Mr. Lawson," the judge said, "will vacate the premises within 30 days. A clean sentence for a messy leaving. As for financial support," he continued, adjusting his glasses, "this court orders child support in accordance with the guidelines as well as spousal support for a period of 4 years. Numbers would come later. Forms, checks mailed or withheld or fought over. For now, it was just words. But words can be scaffolding. Something to build a different life around." Additionally, the judge said, and here his tone sharpened, "the funds transferred by Mr. Lawson to Ms. Vanessa Collier from marital accounts are to be repaid in full." I saw Richard flinch just slightly. His jaw tightened, a small pulse beating near his temple. "The court considers those transfers a misuse of marital assets," the judge said. "They will be compensated. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't enough to erase what had happened. But it was an acknowledgement, a record that what he took had a cost, that our hurt lived not only in emotions, but in ledgers and statements and accounts drained for a life we never agreed to. The judge paused then, folding his hands on the bench. His gaze moved slowly to me, to Emma, to Richard. Mr. Lawson, he said quietly, your affair, your financial deceit, and your abandonment of parental responsibilities have had severe consequences. The words were clinical, unemotional, but they weighed more than any accusation I could have thrown at him. In seeking joint custody, the judge continued, you asked this court to trust in your judgment, your stability, and your commitment as a parent. He shook his head once, almost imperceptibly. Today's evidence has done the opposite. Richard's shoulders slumped further. He still wouldn't look at us. Not even at her. Some part of me kept waiting for him to stand up, to shout that this was unfair, to fight for something. He didn't. He stared at the table like his life was written there and not in the girl sitting across from him. Accordingly, the judge finished, voice steady, this court rules as stated. These decisions are effective immediately. No gavel slam. Just the soft scratch of his pen signing the order. It was almost anticlimactic, that a life could be split and restructured with nothing more than ink on paper and a tired man's signature. But as he set the pen down, I felt something inside me loosen that I hadn't even realized was clenched. I exhaled. Really exhaled. Not the shallow, shaky breaths I'd been taking all morning. A full one. From the bottom of my lungs. It felt like the first true breath I'd taken in an hour. Maybe longer. The room began to move again. Chairs scraped. People whispered. Folders snapped shut. Richard stayed seated, eyes fixed on the same spot in the wood as if he could stare himself back to a different outcome. Vanessa wasn't there. She never had been. Her name lived on the documents, in the footage, in the evidence. But not in the room where the cost of her presence was being tallied. It struck me in a small, sad way that the life he'd built in secret wasn't here to stand beside him now. He was alone at that table. I was not. Emma sat down beside me again, the bench giving a faint creak under her weight. She relaxed into my side, her shoulder pressing into my arm in a way she hadn't since she was small enough to climb into my lap. The edge of her hair brushed my cheek when she leaned closer. I could smell her shampoo, apple, and something floral. Her voice came out as a whisper, meant only for me. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. She stared straight ahead as she said it, eyes fixed on the front of the room. Guilt threaded its way through the softness of her words. The kind of guilt kids carry for things that were never theirs to hold. I turned my head slightly, pressing my cheek to the top of her hair. My arms moved around her almost on instinct, drawing her in until I could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing against my chest. I held her like I used to when she woke from nightmares. Only this time the monster had been real. You told me when it mattered, I said. My voice was quiet. Not broken. Just honest. She didn't answer. But I felt her exhale, long and slow, into my shoulder. Her body softened, the tension draining out of her. We stayed like that for a moment, mother and daughter curved around the empty space where a husband and father should have been. Around us, the courtroom continued its slow unraveling into ordinary life. The judge moved on to the next case. The bailiff called new names. People came and went, carrying their own stacks of hurt and hope. But at our table, time seemed to pause. I watched the dust float in the thin beam of light coming through the high window. Tiny particles drifting, catching the sun, then disappearing into the air. Some part of me knew that after we walked out those doors, there would be new problems. Bills, schedules, explaining this to family who'd only seen the outside of our marriage. Nothing would be simple. But the thing that had been sitting on my chest for so long, the question of will they believe me, was finally gone. The court had believed me. Believed us. Believed her. And for now, that was enough. I tightened my arms around Emma once more, memorizing the weight of her against me. Then I lifted my head and looked toward the doors. We still had to walk out. We still had to go home. But for the first time in a long time, the word home didn't feel like a question. It felt like a place that still belonged to us. The courthouse doors swung shut behind us with a heavy thud, and suddenly the world felt wider. The air outside was cold and clean, the kind that stings your lungs in the first breath but clears everything after. Autumn leaves skittered across the concrete steps, dried edges clicking softly like tiny bones. For a moment, we just stood there, Emma and I, suspended between the place we'd just escaped and the life waiting ahead. The sky was pale blue, washed out, the kind that comes after a storm has blown through and taken all the color with it. I pulled in a long breath, the chill settling deep in my chest. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken all day. Emma stood beside me, her small fingers wrapped around mine, grounding me more than she knew. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Our silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't full of questions or fear. It was just breathing. Bate joined us a moment later, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. Her hair blew across her face in the wind, but she didn't bother smoothing it down. She looked tired, not defeated, just worn from carrying the weight of someone else's battle. She reached out and shook my hand, firm and warm. You did well in there, she said. I opened my mouth to answer, but she glanced at Emma and smiled softly. Your daughter, she said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret, is braver than most adults I know. Emma's cheeks flushed pink and she ducked her head slightly. But she didn't let go of my hand. She held on tighter. That small movement nearly brought me to my knees. The strength she had shown today. I had no idea she'd been carrying that much courage inside her. Bates squeezed my arm once before stepping back. Go home, she said. Rest, will handle the paperwork later. Then she walked down the steps and disappeared into the crowd, blending into the familiar rush of people who had no idea what had just happened behind those courtroom walls. We made our way to the car slowly, our footsteps echoing against the stone. No hurried pace. No nervous anticipation. Just movement. Leaves swirled around our feet, catching on our shoes and cuffs. The wind tugged at my coat, but the cold didn't reach the hollow places inside me anymore. When we reached the car, I opened the passenger door for Emma. She climbed in without letting go of my hand until the very last second, fingers slipping away reluctantly. I stood there for a moment, staring at the open door, the empty seat beside her. Then I closed it gently and walked around to the driver's side. When I sat down, the silence wrapped around us again. But it was softer now. Warm, like a blanket rather than a walls. The road home looked different. Maybe the light had shifted. Maybe I had. Trees lined the highway, their leaves turning gold and red, tumbling across the asphalt in slow, lazy spirals. Every now and then, one hit the windshield, sticking for a second before sliding away. The rhythm of the tires on the pavement was steady and soothing. Emma watched out the window, her reflection faint in the glass, eyes distant but calm. Halfway home, she spoke. Her voice was small, uncertain. Are you okay? The question hung in the air, fragile and enormous. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't answer right away. What did okay mean anymore? Was it the absence of pain? The return of hope? The simple act of breathing without feeling like something was pressing on your chest? The trees blurred past in streaks of color. A gust of wind sent a flurry of leaves spinning across the road, scattering like birds startled into flight. Finally, I spoke. I will be. The words surprised me. Not because I said them, but because I believed them. For the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like a lie I was telling myself to get through the night. They felt like a beginning. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes still on the window. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her hand reached across the console, palm up. I took it. She held on. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had: white siding, cracked walkway, porch light that flickered when the wind blew. But something inside me shifted when I looked at it. This was home. Ours. Not a place I was trying to hold together for someone who had already walked away. Not a battlefield. Not a waiting room for a life that never returned. Just home. We walked up the steps, the wood creaking under our weight like it remembered us. The porch still smelled faintly of old paint and dried leaves. The swing chain rattled softly in the wind. Once inside, the quiet wrapped around us again. But it wasn't oppressive anymore. It didn't echo with absence. It was the good kind of quiet. The kind that feels like space being cleared. Like air being let in. Like starting over. We didn't turn on the lights. We didn't put our bags down. We just dropped our coats on the hooks and walked back outside to the porch. The sun was setting, bleeding orange and pink across the sky, painting the tops of the trees in warm light. We sat down together on the porch steps, side by side. The wood was cool beneath us, rough under my palm as I leaned back slightly. Emma rested her head on my shoulder, her hair brushing my cheek. Her weight settled against me, familiar and comforting. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. She sighed a soft, content sound and relaxed fully into me. We watched the sun sink lower, the sky shifting through shades of fire and rose and finally lavender. The house behind us was quiet. Not empty, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a beginning rather than an ending. The kind that lets you hear your own heartbeat again. Steady, alive. As the last light faded and the first cool shadow stretched across the yard, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace, not happiness, not relief. Peace, soft and steady, settling into the spaces where hurt had lived. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold evening air. We were here. We were safe. We were together. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something waiting. The porch creaked gently beneath us as if the house itself exhaled with us. I opened my eyes, watching the last ribbon of sunlight slip behind the trees, and whispered to no one in particular, or maybe to both of us. We're going to be okay. And this time I knew it was true.